if you thought that the phrase heavenly warfare is an oxymoron, then prepare to be proven absolutely wrong. Today I'll take you through celestial battles, devilish plots, and divine victories. Last time, we have seen an angel speaking to a human about these things, and he continues to do so. And while they are in conversation, we get a glimpse into this cosmic drama in So, as I was telling you, Raphael was speaking to Adam about this war in heaven. And you remember Abdil, the angel who stood up against Satan? He came back and he saw that the good angels were also preparing themselves. Of course, God knew everything and had already instructed his set of good angels to work towards some kind of a clash and eventual victory. God saw that Abdil was harassed by these rebel angels when he stood up against them, and God praised Abdil for it. Now, in every army, there has to be a supreme commander. So God appoints Michael as the chief commander of his army. And Gabriel is his second in command. So Michael, Gabriel, these are, one of the most elite angels who fought in the God's army. So God had instructed them that your job is to go and drive these rebel angels out of heaven so that they can be thrown down into the abyss, a place which God had prepared for their punishment. So this heavenly army, they followed all the protocols of war, and they flew off to battle in their perfect ranks. When they met Satan's army, they lined up against each other. And this is when Raphael, he comments on how strange it was all, because, it was like angels were fighting angels. And both were children of the same God. Anyway, so Satan, who tried to look like he was equal to God, he came forward and he was on this golden chariot which resembled God's throne. And Abdil was scandalized by this show that Satan was putting up, and he found it blasphemy. So he goes and confronts Satan. And then he says, "Proud art thou met? Thy hope was to have reached the height of thy aspiring, unopposed, the throne of God unguarded. So you thought that you would be able to destroy God's position because God's throne is unprotected, and his side abandoned at the terror of thy power. You thought that God's angels would all be scared of you and would leave God's side." So this is also very strange, because Abdil what is he actually trying to say here? Is he trying to say that God is protected by his angels? He doesn't, of course, mean that, but somehow these words sound as if he is trying to imply that don't think that angels have abandoned God. What if angels have abandoned God? Would God be defeated then? Fool, not to think how vain against the omnipotent to rise in arms. So you have risen in arms against the omnipotent, the all-powerful God, and it's a foolish thing that you've done. Now, Satan is not a person to take insults and be quiet about it. So he also responds with insults, and he calls Abdil cowardly and vain, and he mocked all the good angels. And somehow he is always putting this point across that the angels who have remained on God's side, they are choosing servility, while he has chosen freedom. So he sounds heroic like he always does. Abdil continues to, speak in favor of God, saying that God is the natural monarch, so they are supposed to be servile to God, and it's a nice thing that they are serving God. And then he says, "Reign thou in hell, thy kingdom, let me serve in heaven, God ever blessed." Now, I feel that this is a very strange thing because, see, Satan has not yet fallen to hell, right? And it is not very clear what kind of punishment is waiting for him in hell and what kind of situation he will be thrown into. And therefore, we have this odd feeling that had this all been predestined? Did God know that Satan is going to do this? Yes, he knew. Did he want Satan to do this? That is something which Milton chooses not to address yet. Okay, because see, the hell is already prepared. And Abdil knows that once Satan is in hell, he's going to be ruling hell. And then he says that don't think that if you go to hell, you will be a ruler in any proper sense, because he says, yet chains in hell, not realms expect. So don't expect to have great land in hell to rule over. You will only have chains there. And then, Abdil struck Satan, knocking him backwards, and the battle began. Michael, he blew his trumpet as if to announce the start of the battle, and it raged on evenly for a long time, and there was a great chaos and destruction in heaven. But then, if angels are so powerful, why did they not destroy each other? How could they not destroy each other? That is because God limited their power. So it was like they did not have their full version of power activated yet, because God knew that if they unleashed their entire strength, they were so powerful that it would destroy everything. So God thought that I have to keep this creation intact, so I have to limit the power of the fighting angels. So it appears as if God is playing some kind of a video game simulation where he can control the power. So why can't he stop the whole thing? These are the questions that Milton doesn't ask openly in Paradise Lost. And you have to remember that who is narrating this. In Paradise Lost, you have many voices. Sometimes you have the voice of Satan. Sometimes you have the voice of the heavenly muse through the poet. And then here, this is like the narrative voice of Raphael is putting a filter and then showing us what has happened. Although I wouldn't call it unreliable narration, I'm not saying that Raphael was saying anything that did not happen, but then the small little things that Raphael says shows his bias in some way. And those are the gaps in which we can look into to understand if Milton was actually asking some pertinent questions here. Finally, Satan fought his way through to Michael. So here, the commander of this side is facing the commander of that side. And just as we see in popular Bollywood movies, before the actual fight, they start talking, throwing insults at each other. And this is part of an epic convention. In great epics, a moment is built up. It's not like somebody confronts another person and there's an immediate fight and action. No. Words are important because words are something which reveal intentions, basic nature of the characters who are facing each other, and a kind of a foreshadowing of what is to come. So, what does Michael say to Satan? He says, heaven casts thee out from all her confines, so you are outcast from heaven. Heaven, the seat of bliss, brooks not the works of violence and war. Hence then, an evil go with thee along, thy offspring, to the place of evil, hell, thou and thy wicked crew. So you are banished from heaven, because in heaven there is no place for violence and warfare. Who is saying this? An angel who is fighting in a war with quite a lot of violence right now. Satan says that if he lost, he will turn heaven into hell. So he's kind of giving some empty threats here. And he says, or not, that so shall end the strife which thou callest evil. You are calling my fight evil, and don't you think that I'm going to end this so easily. But we style the strife of glory. It's like there's a statement, right, that one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. So it's a matter of perspectives. For Michael, it's a war which is evil. For Satan, it is something which is of glory, which we mean to win, or turn this heaven itself into the hell thou fablest. You are giving me these stories about this beautiful heaven. I'm going to turn that into hell if I lose this battle. Here, however, to dwell free, if not to reign. So my mantra is to reign free. And after they exchange these cordial words of hatred to each other, they begin to fight. Both very glorious and powerful, like two planets colliding, they're huge. God had given Michael this special sword. So his sword was specially tempered by God. So with that sword, Michael shears off Satan's entire right side. And for the first time, Satan feels pain. Was there blood? No. There was nectarous humor. Humor in the sense bodily fluid. If you remember about this comedy of humors, you would know that humors in Middle English period, in medieval times, they stood for the kind of bodily fluids humans have. And there were 4 kinds: blood, phlegm, choler, and melancholy. And depending on their proportion or lack of proportion, a person would have a certain kind of temperament. Now, since Satan is not human, he will not have blood, phlegm, choler, or melancholy. He will have nectarious, or something which is heavenly, something which is angelic fluid in his body. So there is something physical about Satan here. So he was bleeding, nectarious humor from his wound, but he soon recovered because, well, he was not made of flesh and blood. So his wounds closed, and until his wounds closed, his supporters kind of defended him. On the other part of the battlefield, there was this incident where Gabriel, he cut Moloch into half. So while these cosmic massacres were going on, one thing emerges out of it, that these angels would not be able to actually kill each other. So how would this end? Would it at all end? But this battle was crucial because it was in this battle that for the first time the rebel angels understood what pain is. And they understood that pain is the consequence of their disobedience. Night fell, and the armies, both of them, they retired, and for the night they regrouped. The good angels flew back in a cube formation. Satan, who was, well, already healed, he started another meeting. Now this idea of meeting, council, is what separates Satan from God's ways. In God we see a kind of absence of any consultation. God doesn't consult. He declares, he proclaims, let there be light. He doesn't consult with anybody. Should there be light? In Satan, we see an element of interaction with his peers. But then you have to remember that in every situation, he manages somehow to establish his point of view as the unanimous decision of the council. So in a way, he does play God, but he is a trickster to make people understand, or to make his followers believe that he is following the codes of democracy and a kind of cooperative behavior. the first thing that he tells his followers is that, see, you're not going to die, you're not going to be destroyed completely. So, no matter how many times we are defeated, we cannot be done away with. So, that is kind of the motivation you should have in you. So, this is his first approach. And he says, companions dear. Note the way he uses the words companion, comrade, to reinforce the idea that they are like equals. Companions dear, found worthy not of liberty alone. You are not just fit for freedom to mean pretense, but what we more affect: honor, dominion, glory, and renown. So we are not just fighting for liberty here, we are fighting for fame, glory. So he wants to infect his followers with the same kind of ambition that he is infected with. I'm making it sound as if ambition is a disease, but he's almost speaking like that. Ironically, this is also line number 420, which in an Indian context, it refers to the crime of cheating somebody. And then he says that if we have survived one day, we can survive unlimited number of days. He proposes that let's prepare something, a kind of a weapon, and try to overcome these good angels with our cleverness. Nisroch, who is the chief of principalities, proposed creating a device. So he said, okay, I'll make something, and he proposes to create something like a cannon, which will cause good angels pain, because they have understood that the only problem that they can cause to each other is pain. They cannot cause death. So Nisroch wants to prepare something that would cause pain to the good angels. Satan suggested mining materials, dark and crude, and this idea of mining is often associated with the satanic crew, as we have seen in the first book itself. You remember Mammon and his mining engineers. And this was how they were using gunpowders long before human beings knew what gunpowders were. And this is described here like this. Deep underground materials, dark and crude, of spirituous and fiery spume, till touched with heaven's ray and tempered, they shoot forth. So this is what gunpowder is. They have this potential of explosion. And when they are put in a cannon, well, they explode. Such implements of mischief as shall dash to pieces and overwhelm whatever stands adverse, that they shall fear, we have disarmed the thunderer of his only dreaded bolt. So this is going to be the equivalent of God's thunder. In book 1, if you remember, Satan had once said, who knew the power of those dire arms? Arms means weapons. This was the moment he was talking about, that they thought they were building an equivalent to God's thunder. They did not know the actual power of God's thunder. So the rebel angels, they spent the night constructing these cannons. The next morning, the armies faced off again. And then Satan, he reveals his cannons, and he uses this sarcastic speech and speaks about sending proposals of peace. The good angels were quite confused. Now, you must remember one thing, that Satan is not just associated with the evil. He is also associated with invention, because angels are what? They are not interested in anything more than what God wants them to think about. Satan and his followers are always innovating something. Now it is up to you to think whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. But obviously it is a bad thing because it is satanic. So this is the paradox that we are flung into. Apparently, it's very easy to dismiss the cannon, the gunpowder as the most evil things that human beings have discovered or invented. But don't they also represent the development of science? Don't they also represent innovation, exploration? That is where the romantic critics who were looking at Paradise Lost felt that Milton was not entirely against this idea of Satan and his preference for freedom from God's clutches. That is the romantic critics' idea. So the rebels fired the cannons, and that caused great injury to the good angels. But then again, they could not be killed. The good angels had their armors, they were trying to stop these cannonballs hurled at them, but they were somehow facing the brunt of this horrible new engine, and they grew very angry now. So they ripped up hills, the good angels, and they started throwing them like peltering stones at the rebel angels. And the cannons were buried because they were taking chunks and pieces of hills and they were throwing at these cannons. So eventually those cannons broke. So what was happening here is that there was a clash that was not supposed to end naturally because they could not completely destroy each other. This was when God, who was observing everything, he speaks to his son. And what does he say? When two such foes, see, you can see two armies fighting each other who are almost equal in their might and they are immortals. So what will happen? When two such foes met armed, for to themselves I left them, and thou knowest. You know that I wanted them to fight each other. Equal in their creation, they were formed, but they have equal strengths, because when I created Michael and I created Satan, I created them in similar ways and gave them equal powers. So obviously, it's going to be a difficult thing. They're not going to actually defeat each other. And then he says that they needs must last endless and no solution will be found. If this war continues, it will continue till eternity. And then he says, 2 days are therefore past. The third is thine. So he is now addressing his son and saying that this is now time for you to do something. And here he deliberately makes his son wait for 2 days. Why? Because if he had sent his son on the very first day and he defeated the rebel angels, it would appear as if he was given some special power by God. It won't be something very interesting. He wanted to establish the fact in front of the other good angels that they cannot defeat Satan completely. The son can defeat Satan completely. Therefore, son is superior. So this was also a strategy to establish the superiority of the son over the good angels. This is how this whole thing appears to be, the way Milton is showing it. And interestingly, this is narrated by Raphael, who was also a good angel. He doesn't know what he's talking about here, it seems. And this is not something that I am making up. This is something that is written right after this, because God says, why is he doing this? That all may know in heaven and hell thy power above compare. So this is how I'm going to prove to them that you are superior to other good angels. And this perverse commotion governed thus, to manifest thee worthiest to be heir. Okay, so this entire battle is actually a means to establish the superiority of the son. So, is Milton trying to say this, that God orchestrated everything? It was actually really kind of a video game that he had planned, a simulation, a strategy to establish that what he declared, that this is my son and he is going to be next in power. To establish that as a logical thing, how is he different from Satan then? And he says, and this perverse commotion governed thus, to manifest thee worthiest to be heir of all things, to be heir and to be the king by sacred unction, thy deserved right. So God sent his son to prove his might. The sun donned all the armor and power of God, and he even got that special divine chariot. And Michael, what he does when he sees that the sun is approaching, he retreats. He lets the sun go and face the rebellious army all by himself. Why? Because, again, part of this whole idea of establishing the almost omnipotence of the sun. I'm saying almost because the sun is not God, but next in power. So, almost omnipotent. The rebels attempted to fight, of course, but the sun wielded 10,000 thunders and drove them away. And he kind of drove them to this end of heaven, the precipice. And they were so scared that rather than face those thunders or the weapons of the sun, they chose to fling themselves into the abyss and fall into hell. And there we have this beautiful description that what was hell witnessing. Hell was like looking up and seeing angels coming down one by one. Hell heard the unsufferable noise, the noise of the thunders. Hell saw heaven ruining from heaven and would have fled affrighted. Hell was scared. But hell couldn't move because it was stationary, it was a place. But strict fate had cast too deep her dark foundations. Hell was founded on such solid foundations that she couldn't move. Did you notice that Milton is using her in connection with hell? Is hell feminine? Female? People who are writing papers on Milton being a misogynist can write on this. So hell has dark foundation and she cannot move. 9 days they fell. We know this. We have known this since the first book. Confounded chaos roared. Now chaos is another thing. Okay, it's not an abstract thing here. Chaos is a real entity whose realm is just outside the realm of hell. Remember when Satan came out of hell, he went through chaos. So chaos was very confused. Chaos is confusion, okay, but it is like more confused now with all the sound and everything going around, and felt tenfold confusion in their fall through his wild anarchy. So chaos is male, hell is female. So huge a rout encumbered him with ruin. Hell at last, yawning, received them whole. So it's like hell is receiving, like Satan said, receive thy new possessor. So even if it is hell, there's a strange, subtle kind of possession that Satan wants to establish when he's talking about hell. So it's a beautiful image. You imagine it's like a woman yawning and something entering her, and she's closing everything down. And then we are taken to the moment when we first saw Satan. Okay? So that was medias res. This is the beginning, the before story, the backstory. So the sun, who was now triumphant, goes back to his God, and he was worshipped and praised by everybody, and he sat at the right hand of his father. And Raphael concludes by saying that, see, I have told you as much as possible, because it's difficult to give you information about heavenly things, because I'm using the language of humans. And in human language, certain ideas cannot be expressed. And this inability to express the heavenly through human language, it has always been mentioned in this book multiple times. It is as if Milton is trying to reinforce the idea that language has its limits because it can only capture your perception, whatever you are acquainted with. To go beyond that is to rely on imagination. And when it is about imagination, there are chances that people will call it false. And that's why he constantly talks about these heavenly muses and these authority figures from whom he is getting information to validate his own points. So, why does Raphael say all these things to Adam? He wants Adam to be cautious about this Satan and to understand that if he follows Satan's lead, he would also end up punished like Satan. And Raphael says, and just note one little thing what he says here, but listen not to his temptations. So this is the basic idea that Raphael is giving Adam, that don't listen to Satan. And then what does he say right after this? Pay attention. Warn thy weaker. So Raphael is calling Eve the weaker when he is referring to her. He is not saying warn thy wife. He is not saying warn thy companion. He knows Eve's name. He could have easily said warn Eve, warn Mrs. Adam. No, he chooses the word weaker. And this expression, wife as the weaker vessel, this appears in the Bible. If you know in which book it appears, you can write in the comment section. And yes, people writing papers on misogynism of Milton. Remember one thing, this is not what Milton is saying. This is what Raphael, the good angel, is saying. So it's up to you. Will you consider Shakespeare a serial killer because Macbeth killed one man after another? No. So what we can say is that there are characters in Paradise Lost who exhibit misogynism, such as Raphael speaking to Adam. And it's not misogynism, it's more like a condescending look at women as the weaker, as the more vulnerable, as the less dependable counterparts of man. Okay? And he says, warn thy weaker, let it profit thee to have heard by terrible example, let it profit thee. Let this storytelling session we had be something that will profit you. Example, the reward of disobedience. So instead of using the word punishment, he says reward of disobedience. So reward of disobedience means punishment of disobedience. So let it be a kind of a moral lesson for you so that you know what will happen to you if you are disobedient. Firm they might have stood, yet fell. So Satan and his followers were firm, they were solid, but they fell and feared to transgress. So they were firm, but they fell. So if you are transgressive, if you are disobedient to God's ways, then you will not be spared as well, because they were also God's children. So this is how book 6 ends. It's not very complicated. Not much happens. It's just Raphael's storytelling session. Book 7, 8 are also going to be simpler compared to book 9, which I want to take up in a greater detail, just like I have done with book 4. So I want you to stay connected so that we can finish this epic together. Do tell me how you find this series and share this content with your friends, because you are all we have to help grow this channel. So this is Monami Mukherjee signing off. See you all very soon in our next video. Till then, stay happy, stay safe. Bye-bye.